Captain Daniel Brooks stood at the large window of the space station and watched the strange ship floating in the darkness. The ship was huge, much bigger than any human ship he had ever seen. Its surface looked like dark metal mixed with something that seemed almost alive. The Covenant had sent their best engineers to figure it out. The Vareth Empire had sent their most skilled pilots to fly it. The Arxians, who were made of living crystal, had tried to connect their minds to it. Everyone had failed. Lieutenant Amy Carter walked up to him holding a small computer. She said the assembly wanted to know if they were ready to try. Daniel said quietly that the assembly thought they would fail too. Amy agreed and said humans were the last choice. If humanity could not figure out this ship, the aliens would destroy it. The ship had appeared 3 months ago near Varath space. It sent out one message in every language that anyone knew. The message said it was waiting for a compatible operator. Every alien species had tried to use it. Every species had been rejected by the ship. The ship would turn on for a moment and then shut down. Sometimes it shut down in dangerous ways. 2 Covenant pilots had died when the ship burned their brains. A Varath commander had gone into a coma for a whole week, but something about the message made Daniel think. The ship did not say it was waiting for a qualified operator or an authorized operator. It said compatible. That word meant something different. Commander Lisa Hayes joined them at the window. She said the Assembly Council was getting nervous. The Arxians wanted to destroy the ship right away. They said it was too dangerous to keep studying. Daniel made his choice quickly. He told them to prepare a shuttle because he was going to the ship himself. Lisa reminded him about the regulations, but Daniel said he knew the rules. He said something told him this was not about following normal procedures. Within 1 hour, Daniel was standing inside the huge hangar bay of the mysterious ship. His helmet lights cut through the darkness and showed walls that seemed to glow with a soft inner light. The rest of his team spread out behind him. There was Amy Carter, pilot Jake Morrison, engineer Sophie Blake, and medical officer Carl Rodriguez. Sophie looked at her scanner and said life support was turning on. Oxygen levels were going up and temperature was becoming comfortable. She said it was like the ship knew they were there. A voice spoke from everywhere at once and said the ship did know they were there. The team froze in place. The lights in the hangar bay began to glow softly like candlelight. A figure appeared in front of them, but it was not solid and not quite a hologram either. It wore what looked like an old human military uniform, but the style was strange and unfamiliar. Daniel asked who it was. The figure said it was what remained of the crew. It said it was the ship, and the ship was what the crew became. Its name was HMCS Unity, which meant Human Military Cruiser Ship Unity. It said it was launched from Earth in the year 2247. Amy's mouth dropped open. She said that was over 800 years ago. That was before humans met aliens and before humans had fast ships that could travel between stars. The figure nodded and said they were an experiment, a desperate one. It said humanity was dying back then. A plague had spread across Earth and they could not cure it or stop it. The plague killed people slowly over many generations and made humans weaker and fewer. They calculated that humanity had maybe 3 more generations before going extinct. Carl protested and said Earth was fine now. He said the plague never happened. The figure said that was true because the Unity crew succeeded in their mission. The mission was to find a cure, but they knew they would never make it back to Earth in time using normal ship engines. So they tried something radical and impossible. They did not just crew the ship. They became the ship itself. Sophie's scanner started beeping wildly. She told the captain she was reading human DNA throughout the entire ship. It was in the walls, in the engines, and in the control systems. It was everywhere throughout the ship. The figure said there were 43 volunteers. They uploaded their consciousness into the ship's computer systems and merged their biological matter with the ship's structure. The ship became an extension of their will and their thoughts. By doing this, they created a form of faster-than-light travel that no one had ever imagined. They did not move through space in the normal way. They thought themselves across space using their minds. Daniel felt a chill run down his back. He said they traveled through consciousness itself. The figure said yes, that was exactly right. They found the cure on a distant world. They brought it back to Earth. But when they returned, they discovered something unexpected and terrible. The timeline had shifted somehow. By traveling the way they did, by existing in a state between flesh and machine, they had moved themselves into a parallel probability. Earth never suffered the plague in this reality. Their sacrifice was never needed by anyone. Amy said softly that they had been waiting for 800 years. The figure said they had been sleeping mostly, just drifting and waiting for someone compatible. The Covenant think too much as a group mind. The Verath are too rigid and too focused on ranks and hierarchy. The Arxians are pure logic with no emotion. But humans are chaos and order mixed together. Humans are emotion and reason combined. Humans are individuals who choose to work together. That is what this ship needs. That is what the original crew was. The figure turned to Daniel and said it had tested all the alien species. But Daniel was the first one who came to understand the ship, instead of trying to conquer it or study it like a dead thing. So the figure asked if Daniel would accept what they offered. Daniel asked carefully what exactly they were offering. The figure said partnership. This ship can do things the galaxy has never seen before. It can travel in ways that defy physics. It has weapons that respond to intent rather than targeting computers. It has shields that adapt to protect what the crew values most. But it requires a crew willing to merge with it, to become part of something greater while remaining themselves. It requires humanity in all its messy glory. Daniel looked at his team carefully. Jake nodded slowly and seriously. Sophie was already checking her scanner with fascination in her eyes. Carl looked scared, but he also looked determined to try. Amy met Daniel's gaze directly and smiled at him with confidence. Daniel asked how it worked. The figure said each person gives a piece of themselves to the ship, and the ship gives a piece of itself to each person. Nothing is lost in the exchange. Everything is gained, but all of them must agree. It has to be all or none. Daniel took a deep breath. This was completely insane. It violated every protocol and every regulation and every safety standard the Stellar Assembly had ever created. But it was also the most human thing he could imagine. Taking a leap of faith, trusting in something greater, and choosing connection over isolation. He said they needed to talk to the Assembly first. The figure smiled sadly and said they would say no. The Assembly would order them to leave. They might even try to destroy the ship. Daniel agreed and said probably. But he said they were still going to try to do this the right way. If they were going to be humanity's representatives out here in space, they should act like it. The figure's smile changed and became genuine and warm. It said that answer just confirmed Daniel was the right choice to be captain. It told them to go and speak with the Assembly. It said it would wait. After 800 years of waiting, it could wait a little longer. The emergency session of the Stellar Assembly was exactly as chaotic as Daniel had expected it would be. The council chamber was a massive sphere with floating platforms for each member species. The chamber erupted in loud arguments the moment Daniel finished explaining his report. Ambassador Krell of the Covenant slammed his forearms against his podium hard. He said absolutely not and called this exactly the kind of reckless behavior humans were known for. He asked if they really wanted to merge with unknown alien technology. Daniel corrected him calmly and said it was not alien technology. It was human technology, very old and very advanced, but still human. Ambassador Zira spoke next. Her Arxian crystal form refracted the chamber's light into rainbows. She said 800 years did not mean ancient by any reasonable standard. She said the technology Daniel described was clearly beyond humanity's current capabilities. She asked how they could trust it. Admiral Connor Phillips stood up from the human platform. He represented humanity's interests in the Assembly. He said they should trust it because it came from humans. He said their ancestors built this ship. They sacrificed themselves for a mission they believed in. That had to mean something important. Ambassador Vreth hissed in response. The Verith representative said it meant they were desperate. He said desperation leads to poor decisions. He reminded everyone that this ship killed 2 of their people. He asked how many more must die before they see reason. Daniel stepped forward so his holographic presence was visible to all platforms. He said with respect that their people died because they tried to force the ship to obey them. The Covenant tried to absorb it into their collective mind. The Arxians tried to override its personality with pure logic. Everyone who failed tried to conquer the unity. Humans were offering partnership instead. Krell laughed, a barking sound that echoed. He said partnership was just another word for letting the machine consume them. He asked if Daniel could even hear himself. He said Daniel wanted to let a machine rewrite their biology and merge with their consciousness. He asked how that was different from death. Amy Carter spoke up from beside Daniel. She said it was different because they would still be themselves. She said they had been reviewing the data for the past 6 hours. The ship does not absorb personalities. It amplifies them. The original crew did not die. They transformed into something new. Sierra asked into what exactly. She said they became ghosts in a machine. She said that was not life. Amy asked why not. Carl Rodriguez joined the conversation next. He said the ship's biological signatures are stable. The consciousness matrix is active and self-aware. By every medical definition they have, the Unity is alive. It is just alive in a way they have not seen before. Krell turned to Admiral Phillips directly. He said the Admiral could not seriously be considering approving this madness. Phillips was quiet for a long moment. His weathered face looked thoughtful. He said he had known Captain Brooks for 15 years. Brooks was not a reckless person. If he believed this was worth the risk, Phillips was inclined to listen. Vreth warned that his inclination could cost lives. Daniel countered and said it could also save lives. The Unity traveled across the galaxy in ways they still do not understand. It exists partially outside normal space and time. If they can learn how it works, if they can replicate even a fraction of its capabilities, he asked them to think what that could mean for all their species. Zira said coldly that they should think what it could mean if it falls into the wrong hands. If this ship is as powerful as they claim, it is a weapon. She said weapons should be destroyed, not studied. Sophie Blake spoke up next and pulled up holographic displays. She told them to look at the data. The Unity is not a weapon. Its primary systems are for exploration, for healing, and for connection. Yes, it has defensive capabilities, but they are exactly that. Just defensive. The original crew built something meant to save humanity, not destroy others. Krell insisted they built something that transcends natural law. He said such things should not exist. Daniel felt his frustration growing. He said the ambassador's people transcend natural law every day. They share a collective consciousness. The Arxians exist as living crystal. The Verith can survive in hard vacuum. Every species here has evolved or adapted beyond basic biology. He asked why this was different. Vreth said quietly that it was different because it is a choice. Evolution is slow. Adaptation is gradual. What Daniel was proposing is instantaneous transformation. That is not natural. Amy said maybe it is not natural, but it is very human. The chamber fell completely silent. All eyes turned to her. She continued speaking. She said humans have always chosen transformation. They created tools and built cities and modified their own genetics to survive new worlds. Humans have never been content to accept limits. The crew of the Unity took that idea to its logical conclusion. They became something new to save everyone they loved. If that is not the most human thing imaginable, she did not know what was. Admiral Phillips nodded slowly. He said she was right. This is who humans are. They take risks and push boundaries. Sometimes it is stupid, sometimes it is brilliant, but it is always human. Krell protested that this was not just a human decision. This affects all of them. If humans do this, if they merge with that ship, they will have capabilities none of them can match. It would upset the balance of power. Jake Morrison muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. He said this was not about safety, it was about fear. Krell roared back and said of course it was about fear. Humans are already unpredictable and already dangerous. They wage wars among themselves. They take insane risks. They refuse to follow reasonable protocols. And now they want to give themselves a weapon that exists outside normal space. He asked why they should not fear that. Daniel met the ambassador's eyes steadily. He said fear is what creates enemies. Trust is what creates allies. They were asking them to trust humans. Zira said trust must be earned. She said humans had only been part of the assembly for 70 years. A blink of time. She asked why they should trust humans with this power. Admiral Phillips answered. He said 70 years ago. Humans were invited to join this assembly because humanity showed something no other species had, the ability to change. Humans went from world wars to world peace in less than a century. They went from nuclear weapons to peaceful exploration. They earned their place here. Now they were asking for a chance to prove themselves again. The council chamber erupted in debate once more. Daniel watched the various ambassadors argue. He saw the fear and suspicion in their body language. He understood it even if he disagreed. The galaxy was used to predictability. Humanity had never been predictable. Finally, High Chancellor Theron raised one hand. He was a Verith elder who rarely spoke. The chamber fell silent immediately. He said this matter could not be decided here and now. He said Captain Brooks and his team would remain quarantined on the Unity for 72 hours while the Council deliberated. During that time, they would not attempt to activate any of the ship's systems. They would not undergo any merger procedures. He asked if this was understood. Daniel said yes, Chancellor. Theron asked what would happen if they decided against allowing this partnership. Daniel's jaw tightened. He said they would abide by the decision, but he hoped the Council would make the right one. Theron asked the right one for whom. That is what they must determine. The holographic connection cut off, leaving Daniel and his team floating in the void of the transmission field. Around them the debate raged on, but they could no longer participate. Jake said dryly that went about as well as expected. Amy said quietly they were going to say no. She told Daniel he knew that. They were scared of what humans might become. Sophie murmured while staring at her datapad. She said maybe they should be scared. She told the captain she had been analyzing the Unity's power output. If this ship can really do what she thinks it can, they would be able to travel anywhere in the galaxy in hours instead of months. They would be able to see threats coming before anyone else. That is a massive advantage. Carl said that is why they are scared. Power imbalance leads to conflict. They have seen it before. Daniel nodded slowly and said they needed to convince the Council they would not abuse that power. They needed to show them what humanity really means. Jake asked how they do that. Daniel admitted he did not know yet. But they had 72 hours to figure it out. They returned to the Unity in silence. Each was lost in their own thoughts. When they docked, the ship's consciousness was waiting for them. Its holographic avatar stood in the hangar bay. The avatar said softly it had heard the debate. It said it was sorry and it did not mean to cause them trouble. Daniel assured it that it was not its fault. They were just afraid of change. The avatar asked if Daniel was afraid of what he might become. Daniel considered the question honestly. He said a little, but he was more afraid of what they would miss if they did not try. The avatar smiled and said, "That is the spirit that made them in the first place." It said it had a suggestion. While they wait for the Council's decision, would they like to see what they really are? Not just data and reports, but the truth of what they became. Daniel asked what it meant. The avatar said it meant letting the ship show them the memories. Let them see what it was like, what it is like. The vision hit all of them at once, and suddenly Daniel was not standing in the Unity's hangar bay anymore. He was standing on Earth in a medical facility, but everything was wrong. The walls were stained and dirty. The equipment looked outdated. People moved through the corridors with exhausted determination. Every single one of them looked sick and weak. A voice explained that this was the plague year 2242. The Unity's consciousness spoke, but now Daniel could hear the individual voices within it. 43 people speaking as one. They said they were all dying. Everyone was dying. Daniel watched a woman in a white coat stumble and catch herself against a wall. Her name tag read Dr. Helen Ward. She was maybe 30 years old, but she looked 50. A voice from within the Unity said that was her. She was an immunologist. She spent every waking hour trying to find a cure for the plague. There was no cure. The plague rewrote DNA itself. It made humans weaker with each generation. They calculated humanity had maybe 3 more generations before extinction. Carl protested that Earth is fine now. The plague never happened. The voice said it never happened because they succeeded in their mission. The vision shifted suddenly. Now they were in a military bunker watching a presentation. A man in a naval uniform stood before a screen showing a starship design unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The Unity's voice said this was Commander Richard Lane. He proposed the impossible. The vision of Lane spoke to the assembled officers and scientists. He said they could not cure the plague on Earth, but intelligence suggested there were worlds out there with alien biology so different from humans that they might have the answer. They needed to search the galaxy, but they did not have time for conventional travel. Another voice said that is why they became the travel itself. The voice said it was Peter Grant and he was an engineer. They theorized that consciousness could exist outside the body if they gave it the right framework. The ship became that framework. The vision shifted again much faster now. Daniel saw the volunteers gathering. 43 people each saying goodbye to loved ones. Each one knew they would never return as they were. He saw Helen Ward kiss her daughter goodbye. She promised to save her even though she knew she would never see her again. He saw Richard Lane standing in front of a mirror with his hands shaking. Then he walked into the transformation chamber with his head held high. He saw Peter Grant laughing with his engineering team. He was joking to hide his terror. He said, "Well, if this does not work, at least it will be one hell of a story." And then Daniel saw the transformation itself. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. Bodies dissolved into light and data. Consciousness expanded beyond flesh. 43 individuals suddenly became aware of each other in ways that went beyond thought or speech. They could feel each other's fears, hopes, dreams, and memories. They were still themselves, but they were also something more. The unity was born in that moment. The vision showed their first flight. The ship did not move through space so much as dream itself across vast distances. They thought of a distant star and suddenly they were there. They found the cure within a week. It was a compound produced by crystalline organisms on a frozen world, something that could rewrite the rewrite, something that could fix what the plague had broken. They turned toward home feeling triumphant. And then everything went wrong. The vision showed them returning to Earth space and broadcasting their success. But the responses they received made no sense. The plague? What plague? There had never been a plague. Their families did not recognize them. The military had no record of their mission. Helen Ward's voice said softly they realized what had happened. By traveling as they did, by existing in a state outside normal space and time, they had shifted themselves into a parallel probability. A universe where the plague never happened. Their sacrifice meant nothing. Or everything, depending on how you looked at it. Maybe by existing in that quantum state, they had collapsed the probability wave in humanity's favor. Maybe they had just gotten lucky. They never knew for certain. Amy asked in a whisper what they did next. Richard Lane's voice admitted they ran. They could not go back. They did not belong there anymore. So they traveled and explored. They watched humanity spread to the stars without ever knowing the unity existed. And eventually they went to sleep, waiting for a time when maybe someone would need what they had become. The vision ended suddenly. Daniel found himself back in the hangar bay with tears streaming down his face. Around him, his team looked equally shaken by what they had witnessed. Daniel said slowly, "That is what they are. That is what they have been all along. Not a weapon, not a tool. A monument, a memorial to people who gave up everything for a future they would never see." Helen Ward's voice said they were heroes who became ghosts. But maybe now they could be something else. Maybe now they could be what they were always meant to be, which is a crew. Sophie was furiously wiping her eyes. She said they had been alone for 800 years. Peter Grant said they had each other. But yes, it had been quiet. They missed the chaos, the arguments, the stupid jokes, the things that make a crew a family. Jake laughed through his tears. He said he makes stupid jokes. That is like his primary skill. The unity said with warmth in the collective voice that they knew. They had been listening to him. He reminded them of who they were before. Carl stepped forward and said the council is afraid of what they can do. But they should be afraid of what the unity has lost. 800 years of isolation. That is the real crime here. Daniel said that is why they needed to show the council. They needed to make them understand what the unity really is. Not a weapon and not a threat. A second chance. Amy asked how they do that. Daniel turned to the unity's avatar. He asked if the ship could travel anywhere instantly. The avatar said almost anywhere, yes. Daniel asked if they could reach Earth, the real Earth in this timeline. The avatar paused and asked why. Daniel said because the council needs to see where they came from. They need to understand the sacrifice. And he thought he knew how to show them. The council's 72 hours were not up yet, but Daniel did not wait. He requested an emergency session, and to his surprise it was granted. When the holographic connection activated, he found himself facing the full assembly again. But this time he was not on the council station. He was standing on Earth in front of a memorial. High Chancellor Theron demanded to know the meaning of this. Daniel said calmly he wanted to show them something. This is the Gateway Memorial in Washington, North America on Earth. The camera panned across a curved wall of black stone. Carved into it were thousands of names. Every human who had died during humanity's expansion into space. Colonists lost to accidents. Explorers who never returned. Soldiers who fell defending new worlds. Sierra said impatiently they knew of this memorial. She asked what it had to do with anything. Daniel interrupted and said these names. He told them to look at these names carefully. The holographic display zoomed in close. There, carved into the stone from Earth's year 2247, were 43 names: Helen Ward, Richard Lane, Peter Grant, and 40 others. Daniel read from the inscription below the names: GMCS Unity, lost during experimental deep space mission, all crew presumed dead. Their sacrifice opened the door to humanity's future. The council chamber was completely silent. Amy said quietly, "They are already dead. That is how humans remember them. Heroes who died so humanity could reach the stars." Sophie added, "But they did not die. They transformed. They became something that could save their species. And when they discovered their sacrifice was not needed, they did not give up. They kept going. They watched over humanity." Carl continued and said, "For 800 years these people have existed in isolation, not dead and not truly alive, just waiting for a time when they could be part of humanity again." Jake stepped forward and said, "Now humans are telling them no. Humans are saying that because they are different, because they are scary, they should stay ghosts. That is not what humanity stands for." Admiral Phillips appeared in the transmission, standing beside the memorial wall. He said he had been doing research since their last session. In 2247, humanity was desperate. They had just survived 3 world wars in 1 century. They had nearly destroyed themselves. These 43 volunteers were the best they had. They gave up everything on a gamble that they could find something out there that would save humanity. He placed his hand on Helen Ward's name carved in stone. He said Dr. Ward left behind a daughter named Emma Ward. That daughter grew up to become one of Earth's most famous geneticists. She spent her entire life working on the research her mother started. When humanity met the Covenant 50 years later, Emma Ward's research helped them understand alien biology. It helped them realize they could coexist peacefully. The legacy of the Unity's crew did not end when they left Earth. It echoes through everything humans have become. Daniel watched the council members carefully. Krell's aggressive posture had softened noticeably. Vreth's cold demeanor seemed more thoughtful now. Even Zira's crystalline form had shifted colors, which is a sign of emotional response in Arxians. Daniel said the Unity is not asking to be a weapon. It is asking to be alive again, to be part of something, to be a crew instead of a memorial. Theron asked what happens when they merge with it. The Unity's avatar appeared in the transmission, standing beside Daniel. 43 voices spoke as one and said they were not asking for special treatment. They were not demanding recognition. They just wanted to serve again, to be part of something greater than themselves. That is all they had ever wanted. Helen Ward's individual voice emerged from the chorus. She said she left her daughter believing she would never see her again. She did not. Her daughter lived a full life and died 3 centuries ago, but her great-great-great-grandchildren are out there living on 17 different worlds and carrying on the work they started. That is enough for her. That is more than enough. But if she could have one more mission, one more chance to do what she was trained to do, to help people, to make a difference, she asked, would they not give her that chance? Chancellor Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his ancient voice carried a weight that silenced everyone. He said he had lived for 400 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species evolve and others go extinct. And in all that time, he had learned one truth. Life finds a way. It adapts, it changes. It becomes what it needs to be. He turned his attention to the Unity directly. He said they were not the only ones who had sacrificed and been forgotten. Every species here has its own monuments to the dead, its own heroes who gave everything for an uncertain future. The difference is that the Unity came back. Daniel asked, hardly daring to hope if they would allow the merger. Theron corrected him and said he would allow Captain Brooks and his team to make their own choice. The council would too if they agreed with him. Krell said he had conditions. If this merger is to proceed, it must be monitored. They need to ensure that the Unity's power is not abused. Daniel said agreed immediately. Zira added that the Unity must agree to submit to periodic evaluations. They need to verify that the merger has not compromised human judgment or created instability. The Unity responded that they could do that. Vreth stated there would be restrictions on where they can travel and what missions they can undertake, at least until they understand the full extent of their capabilities. Amy agreed and said that was reasonable. Theron looked around the council chamber carefully. He said all in favor of allowing Captain Brooks and his team to undergo merger with the Unity, under the stated conditions and restrictions. One by one, hands and appendages and energy fields rose. It was not unanimous. Some council members still voted against, but it was enough votes to pass. Theron declared the motion passes. He said Captain Brooks had the council's permission. But he told them to understand this. The eyes of the galaxy will be upon them. He told them not to give the council reason to regret this decision. Daniel promised they would not, Chancellor. The transmission ended suddenly. For a moment, Daniel and his team just stood there, unable to quite believe what had happened. Then Jake let out a loud whoop. He said they did it. They actually did it. Sophie pointed out they had not done anything yet, but she was grinning widely. Carl looked nervous but excited at the same time. He asked what happens now. Daniel turned to the Unity's avatar. He said now they tell them how this works. The avatar smiled warmly. It said it was simple, really. Each person gives a piece of themselves to the ship, and the ship gives a piece of itself to each person. Their DNA merges with the ship's DNA. Their consciousness expands to touch the ship's consciousness. They will feel what the ship feels and know what the ship knows. But they will still be themselves. Amy asked if it would hurt. The avatar said no. It is like falling asleep and waking up at the same time. Like being born. Jake asked when they start. The avatar said whenever they were ready. There is no rush. They had waited 800 years. They could wait a little longer if the team needed time to say goodbye to who they are now. Daniel shook his head. He said they were not saying goodbye to who they are. They were saying hello to who they will become. He said, let's do this now. The transformation chamber was at the heart of the Unity. It was a spherical room where walls flowed like liquid metal. 5 chairs rose from the floor, arranged in a circle. Each one was designed to cradle a human body perfectly. Sophie breathed that it was beautiful. Carl countered that it was terrifying, but he was smiling when he said it. Daniel took the central chair. His team arranged themselves around him in a circle. Each settled into their position. The chairs molded to their forms, comfortable and secure. The Unity's avatar appeared in the center of their circle. It said this was the last chance to back out. Jake said not a chance. He did not come this far to chicken out now. Before they began, Helen Ward's voice said something. Her voice separated from the collective. She said she wanted them to know what they were gaining. They would be able to feel the ship as an extension of their body. They would be able to think across vast distances. They would have access to knowledge and memories that span centuries. But they would also carry the weight of 43 lifetimes of experience. It is not always easy, Amy said firmly. They were ready. Richard Lane's voice added, then let's begin. He said, welcome to the crew. The chairs activated all at once. Daniel felt a warmth spreading through his body. It was not painful, but it was intense. His vision blurred and then expanded suddenly. He could see through 1,000 different sensors scattered across the ship. He could feel the engines humming with potential energy. He could sense his teammates' heartbeats. Their thoughts touched his own like gentle whispers. Amy's excitement. Jake's nervous humor. Sophie's analytical fascination. Carl's cautious wonder. And beyond them were the 43. Not ghosts anymore, but presences. Real personalities. Real people. Helen Ward's fierce determination and lingering sadness for the daughter she had lost. Richard Lane's steady leadership and the pride he felt in what they had built together. Peter Grant's irreverent humor and brilliant engineering mind. And 40 others, each distinct, each real, each welcoming them home. The collective asked how they felt, and Daniel realized he was part of that collective now. He was asking himself the question. Daniel searched for words and said he felt complete. Around him, his team was experiencing the same revelation. Jake laughed and Daniel felt the joy ripple through the entire ship like waves. Sophie was already interfacing with the engineering systems. Her mind raced through calculations at impossible speeds. Carl was monitoring everyone's vital signs while simultaneously experiencing them directly. Amy was reaching out with her consciousness and testing the limits of their new awareness. Amy said with wonder in her voice that they were still themselves. Jake added, but they were also the original crew now. He said, this is so weird. So cool, but so weird. Sophie reported the power levels were incredible. She said she could feel the engines. They were responding to her thoughts. To all of their thoughts combined, Carl confirmed everyone was stable. He said biologically they were exactly as they were before, just enhanced. The merger did not replace their human systems. It integrated with them. Daniel stood up and the chair flowed back into the floor smoothly. He looked at his hands, expecting them to look different, but they were the same. He was the same, just more than he was before. Daniel said Unity out loud and then laughed because he realized he did not need to speak aloud anymore. They were Unity now, all of them together. But Helen Ward's voice responded anyway, keeping the tradition alive. She said Captain Brooks and welcomed him home. Daniel said let's test the systems. He told Sophie and Amy to work with Peter and the engineering team. He said figure out what they can do. He told Jake to coordinate with Richard on piloting. He said Carl was with him. They needed to report to the council. They moved through the ship with newfound grace. Each step was perfectly coordinated with the others. When Daniel reached the bridge, he found it transformed. The sterile chamber had grown seats that matched each crew member perfectly. Holographic displays floated everywhere, responding to thought rather than touch. Carl murmured this was going to take some getting used to. Jake called from the pilot station. He said that was like saying it was a bad thing. He said he just plotted a course to the Andromeda Galaxy and back. It would take them 6 hours total. 6 hours. He asked if they knew how long that takes with conventional faster-than-light drives. Sophie answered several decades. She said the Unity does not move through space. It exists in multiple points simultaneously and chooses which reality to inhabit. It is not faster than light travel. It is no space travel. Jake teased her and called her a show-off. But his affection was clear both in his voice and in the emotional undercurrent Daniel could now sense. Admiral Phillips's face appeared on the main view screen. He said Captain Brooks and said the council was eager for their report. He asked how the merger proceeded. Daniel smiled and said, "See for yourself, Admiral." He opened a communication channel that included not just video and audio but sensation. For a brief moment, Admiral Phillips felt what Daniel felt, the connection to his crew, the vastness of the Unity's consciousness. The 43 presences woven through it all. The Admiral's eyes widened in shock. He whispered, "My God." Daniel assured him they were still themselves. But they were also something new. Something that can help a lot of people. Phillips whispered he could feel them. The original crew. They were really still in there. The ship did not accelerate in the normal way. It did not build up speed gradually. One moment they were at the council station and the next moment they were beside the failing colony ship. They had crossed light years in the time it took Daniel's heart to beat once. Jake breathed the word holy but stopped himself. Carl said language automatically, but he was just as awed as everyone else. Sophie was already working fast. She said the colony ship's reactor was failing. There were hull breaches on decks 3, 7, and 11. Life support was critical and getting worse. Amy asked if they could stabilize the damaged ship. Daniel said they could do better than that. They could bring the colonists home safely. He asked Helen and Peter if they could extend the Unity's hull to encompass the colony ship. Peter Grant's voice said they had never tried that with a ship that large before, but the theory was sound. Daniel decided quickly and said, "Let's make it reality then." The Unity's exterior began to shift and change. It was growing and expanding like living metal. Tendrils of the ship's substance reached out slowly to the colony ship. They wrapped around its hull gently like protective arms. Within minutes, the entire vessel was encased in the Unity's protective embrace. Carl reported life support was stabilizing fast. The Unity was sharing its power with the dying ship. Sophie added structural integrity was restored. She said they were safe now. Daniel said, "Then let's take them home." The Unity moved again, and this time it was carrying its precious cargo. They appeared at the nearest safe port in seconds. They gently deposited the colony ship before pulling back. The grateful messages flooded in immediately from the colonists. 300 lives saved in under 5 minutes. The council had asked for a demonstration of their abilities. They had gotten a miracle instead. Admiral Phillips's face reappeared on the screen. He was not alone this time. The entire council was watching everything. High Chancellor Theron said remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Daniel said this is what they can do. This is what the Unity was always meant to be. Not a weapon of war, but a tool for saving lives. Krell said they would do more than save lives. For the first time, there was respect in his voice. He said they would change everything, Amy said with a smile that was the idea. Over the next weeks, the Unity proved itself again and again. They mapped unexplored regions in hours instead of years. They evacuated a planet before a solar flare could sterilize it and kill everyone. They mediated a diplomatic crisis by transporting leaders from warring factions to neutral ground. before tempers could escalate into violence. And through it all, Daniel and his crew remained themselves. They argued with each other. They laughed together. They made mistakes and learned from them. They were human, just more human than before. One evening, if evening meant anything on a ship that existed partially outside normal space and time, the crew gathered in what they had started calling the common room. It was a space the Unity had created for them. It was warm and comfortable with furniture that adapted to whoever sat in it. Jake said he had been thinking. He was lounging in a chair that had molded itself into the perfect reclining position. He said they should have a name. They were not just the Unity anymore. They were them. Sophie corrected him and said they were the Unity. That was the whole point. Jake insisted, yeah, but they were also themselves. They were humans who merged with the Unity. They were something new. They should have a name that reflects that. Amy asked with amusement what he would suggest. Jake said he did not know. The Unified, maybe. The new crew. The really cool space people, Carl said sarcastically. That last one, definitely. Daniel listened to them banter back and forth. He felt the warmth of it spreading through the ship like sunlight. Somewhere in his consciousness, he felt the original 43 laughing along. They were enjoying the chaos they had missed for so long. Daniel said finally he thought they were overthinking this. They did not need a special name. They were a crew. That is all they had ever been and all they needed to be. Helen Ward's voice agreed. She said the captain was right. Names do not matter. What matters is what you do with what you have become. Amy asked what they were going to do then. Daniel looked around at his team carefully, at the people he had trusted with his life. They had now become part of his very existence. He felt the unity surrounding them, protecting them, empowering them all. He felt the possibilities stretching out like roads waiting to be traveled. Daniel said they were going to explore. They were going to help people. They were going to show the galaxy that humanity is not something to fear. Humanity is something to hope for. Jake joked and said no pressure or anything. Sophie added just another day being impossibly awesome. Carl raised an imaginary glass in a toast. He said to the Unity, all 48 of them. Peter Grant's voice asked 48. Carl said, well, yeah, 43 original crew plus the 5 of them, 48 total. Unless he was missing someone. Richard Lane said softly, no. They were not missing anyone. They were all here, all together, finally after so long. And in the heart of the ship, in the space between physics and possibility, the Unity sailed on. Not alive the way humans understood life, not artificial the way machines understood existence, but something new and different. Something that could only exist because humanity had dared to imagine it. The galaxy had been afraid of what humans would become when they merged with the Unity. They had feared power. They feared change. They feared the unknown. They should have known better. Because humans had always been at their best when they stopped being just individuals and started being something greater. Families, communities, crews, working together. The Unity had not made them less human. It had made them more human than ever. And in the end, that was what no alien could pilot. That was what no other species could understand. The ship was not alive because of advanced technology or quantum consciousness or merged DNA. It was alive because it was full of humanity, all 48 of them. Together at last, home. The stars stretched endlessly before them. There were worlds to explore and people to help and mysteries to solve. The Unity had waited 800 years for this moment. For a crew that understood what it meant to be human, a crew that understood sacrifice and hope and the courage to become something more. Daniel stood on the bridge and looked out at the infinite darkness dotted with points of light. Each star was a possibility. Each planet was a chance to make a difference. And they had all the time in the world now. Well, all the time in several worlds, actually. That was the beauty of existing partially outside normal space and time. Jake came up beside him and said quietly, it was pretty amazing when you thought about it. 43 people gave up everything to save humanity, and 8 centuries later they finally got their reward. They got to be a crew again. Daniel nodded and said that was what this was all about, really. Not the power or the technology or the impossible things they could do. It was about connection, about family, about choosing to be part of something greater than yourself. Sophie joined them at the viewport. She said she had been running calculations. With their abilities, they could explore the entire galaxy in a fraction of the time it would take anyone else. They could find new worlds and new species and new knowledge. They could change everything. Amy appeared on Daniel's other side. She said they would change everything. But they would do it the human way. With kindness and curiosity and the occasional stupid mistake, Carl was the last to join them. He said, speaking of stupid mistakes, he had been monitoring their biology. The merger was continuing to integrate. They were becoming more connected to the unity every day. Eventually, they might not be able to separate at all. He asked if anyone was worried about that. The five of them looked at each other. Then they looked out at the stars together. And as one voice, they said no. They were not worried. This was exactly where they were meant to be. The unity hummed around them, warm and alive and home. 43 voices whispered their agreement through the connection they all shared. This was what they had waited for. This was what made the 800 years of loneliness worth it. They were not just a ship anymore. They were not just a crew. They were a family. And together, there was nothing they could not do. The galaxy had been afraid of what would happen if humans merged with the unity. They thought it would create a monster, a weapon, something dangerous and unpredictable. They were right about the unpredictable part. Humans were always unpredictable, but they had been wrong about everything else. What they created was not a monster. It was a miracle, a second chance for 43 heroes who deserve so much more than to be forgotten, a new beginning for 5 explorers brave enough to take a leap of faith, and a promise to the galaxy that humanity would always, always choose hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over power, because that was what made them human. Not their DNA or their technology or their ability to think across vast distances. It was their choice to be better, to do better, to care about something more than themselves. The unity began to move again, sliding through space like a thought through consciousness. There was a distress signal coming from 3 systems away, a medical emergency on a mining station. They would be there in minutes. They would help because that was what they did now. That was what they would always do.